Okay, so we are in 2 Timothy chapter 2. We kind of finished off last week down at the end. He was talking about people who are damaging to the church, and that is in contrast to Timothy, who ought to be a workman who does not need to be ashamed. Right, so there are those who are working and they have a reason to be ashamed, and then there are workers who do not need to be ashamed. And he mentions in verse 17 that those who should be ashamed are people who, back up I guess to verse 16, avoid worldly and empty chatter, which leads to further ungodliness. We'll talk a little bit about that. And their talk will spread like gangrene. If you've ever seen any pictures of gangrene, I will not put Google photos of that up there for you, but not a pretty thing. And he mentions two specific people. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus. Hymenaeus is mentioned in other places, likely the same guy, and also not in great context, in not having a reputation for positive things. Men who have gone astray from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already taken place, and they upset the faith of some. So this is kind of an interesting phrase that they are saying that the resurrection has already taken place. There is a resurrection that we all say has already taken place, right? I mean, I think if you are a Christian, you believe that the resurrection of Jesus from the empty tomb, that has taken place. So that's not what he's talking about, because if you were to call people shameful workers who say that Jesus rose on the third day, well, you kind of have to put us all in that camp, including Paul himself. So what resurrection are we talking about that they are saying has already taken place? Yes, it would be the second coming. Yes, the resurrection of all, right? Of that final resurrection that is talked about throughout the Bible, throughout especially the New Testament, the resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous for the day of judgment, the return of Jesus. This is the thing that they are saying has already taken place. So before we go and talk about some of the other things that were going on at that time that Paul was warning Timothy about, and I think by extension warning us about, I think it is interesting, not like ha-ha interesting, but like interesting, that this idea of teaching that Jesus has already returned again is not something that has gone away. It continues to resurface its head every once in a while. The latest one that I am particularly familiar with is, depending on the title that they went by, 70 AD theory for a while, and then I think the latest version is full preterism, which is just a fancy way of saying all the prophecies in the Bible, everything that is ever prophesied has already been fulfilled. It's completely fulfilled. Well, if every prophecy in the Bible is fulfilled, then that means all the ones about the judgment day have also been fulfilled. So the term being a full preterist or a total preterist is a modern thing. And I will tell you, I personally dealt with it where it kind of tried to make inroads into a congregation at one time, and we preached on it and talked about it and all these different things. But what's interesting about that is if you're going to talk about false teaching, there is something a little squirrely about the term false teaching, because there is a truth that we have to recognize, that all of us are imperfect in our knowledge, right? So my guess would be if we sat down and started talking about our faith in Christ and what we understood about the Bible, at some point, doesn't matter which two of us began to talk, we would run into some differences, right? It would just happen. You go, I'm pretty sure you're wrong about that, which is what the other person will think as well. Oh, I'm pretty sure you're wrong about that. And there would be a difference, right? Now, that difference between those two, does that mean that you are false teachers or shameful workers? No, I don't believe it does. But there are certain things that are of such clarity within the text, so important and integral to faith, that you would have to be a shameful worker to continue to propagate that thing. And one that is specifically laid out in Scripture as being that is teaching that the resurrection has already happened. Yeah. Right? Oh, yeah, you had the Jews who said that, Jesus' resurrection has not happened. Right, and you had the Sadducees who did not believe in a resurrection at all, and that's why they were Sadducee. And so, yeah, you have, yes, that was a dad joke just thrown right in. That's extra, just for free. Yeah, so as you look at it, the resurrection, not just the resurrection of Jesus, right? Would we agree that if you do not believe Jesus was raised from the dead, you and I we can't just say, oh, well, we're both Christians, but just we disagree on this one minor thing, right? Paul will talk about that in 1 Corinthians 15, that if Jesus is not raised from the dead, what's the impact for us? Everything's in vain. That's it. Totally wasted, right? So if we don't get on the same page about the resurrection of Jesus from the grave on the third day, we're going to have a problem. There is another resurrection that we need to be on the same page about. And that is that there will come a day where Jesus will return, and we all, those who are alive on the day that happens, and those who have died before, will be resurrected to judgment. Now, if you don't believe that Jesus was raised from the dead on the third day, the implication is, well, what are we doing here? Right? He's not really the Messiah. He doesn't really save us. What's the implication if we believe that the resurrection, the judgment day, has already happened? What's the implication there? What are we doing? That's right. We're right back to the same thing. It's like, well, what are we waiting for? Right? And if the judgment has already occurred, well then, what am I worried about judgment or being prepared for judgment? Right? Lots of verses won't make a lot of sense when you... I think, for example, like Hebrews 9:27 is appointed men to die once and then the judgment, right? Like, oh, well, what does that verse even mean anymore, right? So there's a huge impact if we do not get on the right page about certain things, right? That's also one of the reasons that we talk about things like baptism. What is baptism? We talk about when somebody is baptized, we immerse them in water, and that is what? It is a physical representation of what are you doing with Christ? You're being buried with Him, and then you come out of the water, and what are you doing? Being resurrected with Him. Do you see how the resurrection is a central theme? Right? If we don't get the resurrection part right, all these other things are an issue. And I would also say that any issue that is particularly tied to resurrection is something that we can say, okay, this is a make or break issue. We have a reason to say, okay, we have to figure this one out, because the next thing he says is they've gone astray from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already taken place, and what happens when they're saying that? Very next part of that sentence. And they upset the faith of some, right? You are now tearing people away from Jesus because you do not have a proper understanding of the resurrection. And so it is something that we have to wrestle with as Christians, that there are issues that you are allowed to have time to improve your knowledge of, right? As I mentioned, any two of us could sit down and begin to talk, and we are likely to find something that we disagree on in terms of Scripture. I believe that there is plenty of time and the grace of God for us to work those things out, and it is likely on the day that you die and then you go to meet God, are you going to find that there were some things that you misunderstood about the Scripture? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case, at least for me, that I'm going to find, oh, yeah, I did not see that. And that's okay. It's not that we shouldn't seek truth. Don't misunderstand me. And it's not that there isn't a truth, right? If two Christians disagree over an issue, does that mean believe whatever you want and it doesn't matter? Is that what we're saying? No, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's exactly right. So, like, if you and I disagreed on something, the answer to it is, let's go to the text together and see what the right answer is. And we should diligently seek to do that, which, by the way, is exactly what Paul said to Timothy he would need to do to be an unashamed worker. In verse 14, remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God not to wrangle about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers, but diligently to present yourself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. Right? Our goal should always be to accurately handle the word of truth. And here's my fear. If I get up and talk and I say, look, we can disagree on some issues and still be okay, I don't want you to hear, it doesn't matter how you handle the truth. That's not what I'm saying. Right? What I'm saying is, we are flawed human beings who are all trying to draw closer to Jesus. And in that process, we're always going to be learning. Hopefully, right? I mean, I hope you don't ever get a point in your faith where you just stop learning. Keep learning, keep growing. But I will also say there are some things so foundational to Christianity, so foundational to what we are and what we're doing, that if you get that wrong, you can't even say you're a Christian anymore. If the resurrection has already taken place, like Hymenaeus and Philetus were saying, like total preterists, full preterists are saying, what are we doing? Right? That's what everybody kind of said. Well, what are we doing? We're not Christians anymore. And so these become foundational issues at the core of our faith, because we build our faith on Jesus, and Jesus is who he is based off of the resurrection, right? That is the thing that testifies that he is who he is. And so all the other things connect to that. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts or anything there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great point, right? If you and I disagree on something, you could be right and I could be wrong. I could be right and you could be wrong, or we could both be wrong. What we can't be is both right. That's the one thing, right, is if there's two contradictory views, we can't both be right. And where do we go to look for what is right? Now you're back to what Tony said. We go back to the scriptures. We go back to the precepts of God. We go, and that is what Christians do. That's the central idea of being simply Christians, right? Is let's just go back to the book and be what it says for us to be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. Christianity will be forced on everybody on the judgment day. Right? When Jesus comes back, Christianity is going to be forced on everybody. So all you're doing is saying, hey, you might want to get ready for this thing, right? So, and the funny thing with people and words is we use words in funny ways. When he says force, what he means is talking to me is forcing me. If you mugged him and drug him to the baptistry unconscious and then forced him under the water, then we're going to call that forcing him. But you having a conversation that makes him uncomfortable is not you forcing him. So, yeah. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, the sovereignty of God is forced on all of us. Absolutely. Yeah, Harry? Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And And in comparison to that, what's interesting is the thing that he says that the shameful workers are doing is they have worldly and empty chatter that leads to further ungodliness. Now, the Bereans are the opposite of that, right? They're having a conversation based off of a standard, right? Let's go to the Scriptures to see whether these things are so. These are productive conversations with a goal of finding truth. However, there are other kinds of conversations that people have all the time about spiritual things that never reference a verse. The goal is not to find truth. The goal is to win the argument, which I might mention, even if you are right, if your goal is to win the argument, you need to be fearful that you are in danger of falling into worldly and empty chatter that leads to further ungodliness. You might be right on the issue, but your goal is not to have a Berean-like mentality, right? Yeah. Correct. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. So, yes. Right? Right. I would agree with that. I would agree. So, one of Scott's points here is, okay, you take something like playing cards, which has historically had differing views amongst Christians, right? Oh yeah, like if you went to my house, you go down in the basement, we got decks of cards that get used for games all the. You did not just do that. You you gasped at that. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. For the record, you're going to be staying in that basement with those cards for the next several days, buddy. So, yeah. So I think what you guys are bringing up, which is true, by the way, I agree with that there are certain things that are issues of conscience where the Scriptures leave room for you to make your own decision, which means if we're going to talk about it and there isn't a clear thus saith the Lord, it's a conscience issue, then what we're doing, if we're fighting over it, is empty chatter. Right? That's what we've done. We've moved into, we're discussing things that are of the world, and worldly things, by the way, are not always like directly sinful things. They're like, I don't know, who you're going to vote for. That's a thing of this world. Now, do I have opinions on that? You better believe I do. But if I get in this pulpit, or that one, somehow that one's more powerful. I don't know why. That's the tiny one, right? If I get behind either one of those, and I all of a sudden begin to go onto a political rant, and I could give you good reasons for all the voting choices that I am going to make, it is worldly and empty chatter. Because there's not a thus saith the Lord on that, right? Now, if I get in the pulpit and I say, you should pray for our elected officials. You should pray for whoever is in authority. I can do that, and that is political too, by the way, right? Pray for all of them. But I got a verse for it. That's right. We got a verse for that one, so I can stand on that. So, yes, I think these issues of conscience, these issues of Christian liberty and autonomy, they have to be left to you. Look, you do what you think is right. I'm going to do what I think is right. And doing what you think is right is a biblical concept, right? If it would offend your conscience, you shouldn't do it. And it doesn't matter that other people think they could. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah. For sure. So one of the great things about the Bible is that it does function in a way to give you wisdom, right? If you read through Proverbs, there's all of these principles and ideas of everything from how to have friends to how to show discretion to how to handle your finances, like a whole world of wisdom that God talks about. And you should, and all of us should, be paying attention to those things. But what often happens is the Bible speaks in generalities in those things, and I like the way you said it. So you have to make an informed, personal decision there, right? And what we find is, whatever informed decision I make, if you ask me what decision you should make, guess what I'm going to tell you? I think you should make my informed decision. That's the one because that's the one I chose. That's the one that makes sense to me. Of course I think it's right. If I didn't think it was right, I'd do something else. But that's me, not you. And so you're right. I think the Bible does give a lot of precepts and ideas for how we can make those informed decisions and should, right? And should make those informed decisions. And I mean, even into the political thing, my Christianity has informed the decisions that I make when I go to the voting booth. And I think it ought to, right? Okay. Any other thoughts or comments or anything else I'm missing? Okay. Moving on. Okay, so down to verse 19. He says, "Nevertheless, the firm foundation of God stands, having the seal, the Lord knows those who are His. And everyone who names the name of the Lord is to abstain from wickedness." Okay, so we've got this worldly and empty chatter. Avoid that. Be a workman who is unashamed, handling accurately the word of truth. So there's these two groups. You've got the way Timothy should be, and then you have Hymenaeus and Philetus. And then the end, he says, okay, here's the foundation. Here's the thing that you need to know. And it goes back to exactly what we were just talking about. Two Christians disagree on playing cards, right? Or name another one for me, Scott. One more. That's not true. You've got another one. You've got to have another one. What? Dungeons and Dragons. That is the most geeky one we could have come up with. Okay, so perfect, fabulous. Thank you for not being a coward. So, yeah, and there are opinions on that. I grew up, I did not grow up in a Christian home, but my best friend growing up, and we got into so much trouble, was a Presbyterian preacher's kid. And he was not allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons, so we always had to do it on the down low. And so there are opinions on that, right? And there are opinions on that today. Now, make your informed decisions, right? Other people are going to make their informed decisions. What's the foundation of God say? The Lord knows those who are His. Whatever informed decisions you make, who do you have to stand before? You don't have to stand before the opinions of Scott Beyer. You have to stand before the Lord, and the Lord knows those who are His. So if you are trying to accurately handle the word of truth, and by the way, if you try to accurately handle the word of truth, does that mean you're always going to accurately handle the word of truth? No, it just means you're trying, right? Jesus died for imperfect people. There's room for grace here. But you are attempting to accurately handle the word of truth, and you make I love that phrase, informed decision. You make an informed decision based off of a multiplicity of verses you've looked at, and you think it through, and so you make a decision. Who do you have to stand before with that decision? Not the court of public opinion. You stand before God. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mean to tell me that people can love each other, disagree, and still love each other? And learn from each other in that? Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Abstain from that wickedness. Yeah. Right. That's interesting. Yeah. So one aspect of it, I'll have to noodle on that for a second, whether or not I agree with you. I'm going to have to show some intellectual humility and think about this for a minute, because I was kind of thinking of it. He knows those who are his, meaning he knows, look, the Lord knows I belong to him, meaning I am a Christian. But what you're saying is God knows that all belong to him, and those who name the Lord have to abstain from wickedness. That may also, I'll have to think about that for a second, because that is an interesting, I hadn't even thought of it that way. Regardless, the second part I do think is the key, right? Is if you belong to the Lord, if you name the name of the Lord, you have to abstain from wickedness. And so whatever sort of decisions you're making should be based off of not how close can I get to the line, right? That's a foul way to approach it, right? How close to sin can I get, right? And that is a way that some people live. But instead, I wish to abstain from wickedness. I name the name of the Lord. I don't know if I'm properly understanding your position or not. If I'm not, tell me now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that's why I'm pausing for a second, is I'd never thought of it that way. And I both love and hate that your comments often do that to me, Terry, by the way. It is a paradoxical conflict within me. Because I'm trying in my mind right now, I'm trying to think if there's any way I could say, no, it's definitively one or the other, and I can't. But in the end, I think it really, in one sense, doesn't matter, because we know both to be true. Does the Lord know those who are his, meaning all people belong to him? Yeah. Does he also know those who carry the mark of his Son, no matter what part of the world, what corner they're in, what they've been through? Yeah, he knows that part too. So it is interesting that both ways, I think, will accurately read true. Yeah. 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 He's done all of the work to offer salvation to all mankind, right? It's now up to us. What are we going to do to abstain from wickedness? So, yeah, that's a great point. Yes. Yeah. So, did not belong. So, and that upholds my view. I don't know whether that's. Yeah. Yeah. No. So yes, I think it can mean that. The question is which one it does in this context. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. In the Numbers passage. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, and that one's more clear. I think the key then is context, and looking at context and thinking about it, and right. Yeah, this becomes the thing, is like, okay, well, are both true statements? It's just which one is being referenced right here. Yeah, Perry, did you have something? Yeah, we'll see. Yes. Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. To be right with him. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. But we are where we are at this point. Yes. Let's just accept it. That is also a foster that caused that, for the record, Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Yes. No, I think that I would agree with that, and I think it's also it's fair to make the point, like some of the other things that were brought up is like celebrating Christmas and Easter and things like that. When you talk to people who don't, they bring up good points. Like you talk to people who do not celebrate something like Halloween. I can tell you the points they're going to bring up, and they are some pretty decent points, right? Halloween does not have really great, lovely beginnings to it. And there are some very real reasons that Christians should dwell on and think about those things. And I think there are also reasons that we should be aware of that just because I feel like it's a liberty and maybe it's fine for me, other people are wrestling with that, and I don't want to offend their conscience. And I think we need to always be wary of that. It's an excellent point, right? So, yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So the issue that you're talking about is, how are there other religious people who have Bibles and don't do things like teach that baptism is necessary, or they do teach that the resurrection has already happened? I mean, the people that I ended up having a bit of a skirmish with years back, they had Bibles too. They were quoting verses too for their position that the resurrection has already taken place. How did they get there when they have a Bible and I have a Bible? So there's two different, I think, answers to that, and you don't really know which is the true one until you converse with the person. One answer might be dishonesty. Okay, so it may be that they are just dishonest. That happens sometimes where it's like the verses that make them uncomfortable or would require them to change or have a different view, they're not interested in it, and so there is some level of intellectual dishonesty. That may be it. That's not always it, though. The other might be that they are simply not aware. You have probably noticed this is a big book, right? And I will also tell you that if you go to denominational churches, oftentimes, because it's been a minute, but growing up, I hopped churches all the time, and there are some favorite verses that they stick to, and they don't teach the whole counsel of God. And if that's all you've heard are these portions of the word, but not other portions, you don't have the full picture. And so oftentimes, that's where that confusion is coming in when you talk with people, is that they've never been introduced to more of the Bible. Now, I will also say we need to be careful ourselves that we don't become people who just pick our favorite verses too, right? But I think both of those things can be at play, but you don't know which one it is until you have the conversation with the person. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And all you can do is show them the verses and then let them choose what they're going to do with that, because we don't knock people unconscious and drag them off, because that would be forcing them, right? So, yeah. Okay. Let's see here. We're not even going to make it to chapter 3 at this rate. You all. Okay. Oh, sure. That's your prerogative, yes. Okay, so to make me feel better, we're going to move into chapter 3 a little bit, right? So I'm skipping verse 20 down to the end of the chapter. And here is why I'm doing this. This is a personal choice. When you teach a book, it's my prerogative. I preached a sermon on being a vessel prepared not that long ago. Y'all listened. Y'all got everything you could possibly get from those verses. And we're moving on. That's sarcasm, by the way, but I had to make some choices in terms of time. So this is what we're going to do. We'll pivot to chapter 3 at this point. But understand there's a whole section from verse 20 down through 26 that talks about that idea of being vessels prepared to be used by the Lord. And that is tied to what we previously talked about, which is being a workman who does not need to be ashamed. If you're working for the Lord in a way that is accurately handling the word of truth, you are becoming somebody prepared to be used by Him in whatever capacity He chooses to use you, because it's His kingdom and He gets to decide what your life looks like, not you. That's what a life of faith looks like, and it's not always the way you thought it would turn out, right? That's what we all find. Oh, my life looks different than what I thought. So from there, you go to chapter 3, and he says, but realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come, or perilous times will come. And then he goes to list the things that will happen. Men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. I would argue that what he's talking about when he lists all of these different character traits of people who are lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, so on and so forth, he is not saying there will come a time where people in the world are that way, because at the time that Paul is writing that, are there people who are lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, and arrogant in the world? Yeah, the majority, right? Wide is the gate to destruction. He is talking about it will be within the Lord's body. That within the body of Christ, within the church, you're going to start seeing more and more of the culture infiltrate, and the church not be about Jesus anymore, but be about us and what we want and how we wish to live. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yes. And if you think about it, Jesus dealt with this in His religious world with the Jews, right? Who were the leaders of the Jews that Jesus had a problem with? It's Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, and what do? They walk around holding a form of godliness, right? They've got the long robes, the phylacteries, all those sorts of things, but they are devouring widows' households. They are destructive and arrogant and all of these things. So what he's warning is that that cycle, if we're not careful, will begin to repeat within the church, because religious arrogance is such a tendency for us as human beings. So when he refers to realize this, that in the last days perilous times will come, last days is a relative term. Is he talking about the last days of Timothy's life? Is he talking about the last days of your life? Is he talking about the last days of the world right near the judgment day? Or is he talking about the last days of Israel, which is another term that is used for? And in Hebrews 1, when you talk about the church coming, it says that in these last days, God has spoken to us by His Son. Acts talks about the things that Joel had prophesied, which came to pass in Pentecost and other places, happen in the last days. And Micah 4, in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established at the top of the mountain. That is a messianic prophecy. So this term last days can refer to the end of the world. It could refer to the last days of your own personal life, or it can refer to the last days of an era. And I believe that is exactly what is going on here. The last days, Paul is saying, as you have this complete ending of Judaism and Christianity now moving into the forefront and becoming the mature faith that it would eventually become. Because you have to remember that at the point that Paul's writing 2 Timothy, Christianity is spreading all the time, but Judaism is still bigger than it, right? And idolatry is still bigger than it. Now, in places like Ephesus, they started to get worried. If you remember in Ephesus, there was a riot because Demetrius was concerned that you are turning people away from idolatry and we're going to lose our money and there's all sorts of problems. When he was in Thessalonica, they said, this guy who comes here, he's turning the whole world upside down. So it's happening, but it really hasn't fully happened yet. We're seeing a shift into the Christian era, into the era of Christ and His kingdom. And I think that's what Paul is referring to. As the last days progress, now all of a sudden you're going to have a problem that the church had not really faced up to this point. The problem is not going to be external. It's going to be internal. As more and more people turn to Christianity, you end up having more of these wheat and tare issues. Right? If you remember that parable that Jesus told of the wheat and tares, the wheat and tares are the kingdom. And you have this field, and in the field are good wheat, and then there are tares, lying wheat. And you can't always tell which one is which. And that, I believe, is exactly what is being referred to here is, in these last days, Timothy, you need to be aware some things are going to be changing, and the problems aren't going to just be external persecution, but internal problems, and you'll see more and more of that. Any comments or questions? Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you all so much for your time.